Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for the invitation to be here with you this morning. It's great to see so many of you interested in this topic, and I think, as I contemplated coming in here this morning and I was reading the material yesterday that you had done in preparation for this conference and the areas you were addressing, I wanted to say, where are RTE now? And, I make that point not because I'm critical of RTE, but, there's so many different sides to what we're discussing today. And you're here to discuss quality, and you're enthusiastic about quality. You're enthusiastic about challenging and dealing with the various issues that are out there in the early years sector. That's why you're here this morning. That's why you have this network. That's why this wonderful book, which I'm going to refer to, was written last year about equality and diversity. That's why you have your guest speaker back after 15 years. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. And, we are meeting today in the context of that disturbing programme and a focus on the early years. And I have to say, I welcome that focus. I think it's really important. In fact, I had been trying to get a focus on the early years, as Toby and others will tell you, over the last year or two. Because I believe passionately that what happens to our children, particularly obviously all our children, but what happens to our children in the early years is critically important. And I strongly believe, and I am of the view, that we haven't had enough focus in this country on the under fives. And I think that's been starkly illustrated in the debate we've had since that programme. And people have expressed surprise about various issues. You know them better than the public out there. The issues around training, around commitment of resources, the issues about free, accessible, subsidised. What kind of quality childcare do we offer in Ireland, and to whom? What kind of training is available? What kind of pay is available? Suddenly all of those issues have got a new lens and a new perspective. And I think there's many parents out there who are quite surprised about what they have found out and now know about the sector that they didn't know before. Of course, what most parents, including myself, have experienced is high quality and passionate people. And going back over my own career, 30 years ago, I suppose, I was very conscious of the huge commitment and passion that so many women and men, primarily women, of course, in the sector, but the passion that so many had setting up small preschools, running playgroups, opening up Montessori's, giving parents the kind of support that parents need, and doing it with very little support from any state. And of course, what we saw then over 10 years, particularly the 10 to 15 years of the Celtic Tiger, we saw an explosion in facilities, a huge need arising to support parents to balance work and family life. And of course, the very important point, the recognition that quality really matters. It isn't just about helping parents combine work and family life. Of course, that's absolutely critical. And I keep saying every time I speak about this, we're going to have to address all of these issues. We're going to have to deal with them, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's an economic imperative as well. Going forward, our country needs high quality care for our children. Parents need to be confident about the supports that are out there, and they need to be helped to access those supports. So that's the challenge that we're facing at a particularly difficult time in our economy, where we're borrowing $1 billion a month. But sometimes great things can happen at times of economic difficulty. And what I'd like your support to do is to make sure that even though this is a time of great economic difficulty, it becomes a time of opportunity to do the very best for our children, for the early years sector. The last 2 days I spent at a round table discussing how we will deal with the challenges of youth unemployment and the contribution that youth work can play to that and give to that. And during the course of the debate yesterday, one person stood up and said, what we're talking about here, we were talking about the 50% unemployment rate of some countries have, the 30% rate we have here in Ireland, and what kind of a future do our youth face? And somebody stood up and said, well, this isn't really very different to the early years sector and what they're trying to cope with. It's about early intervention. It's about proper training opportunities. It's about soft skills. We had somebody there from Accenture, and what do they talk about? What's needed in the workforce today? What is needed primarily are those soft skills of management, of leadership, of being able to get on with people, communicate with people. That's actually where the skills are missing. We often think it's in the hard skills. It's not. It's in the soft skills. And of course, when you think about early intervention and early years childhood care and education, when you think about what you're speaking about here today, about diversity, about equality, isn't that the very place where you begin to build those skills and give young children the confidence? Because it is often about confidence and self-esteem. Those are the qualities that will help you cope in this very diverse work place that we have now. They are the skills that will help you to become an entrepreneur, and increasingly it is our young entrepreneurs who will be creating the jobs out there. So I thought it was very interesting to see this connection at a conference that was about our 18 to 25-year-olds and youth and employment and beyond, that we actually went right back to early education, and I think that's absolutely right. So I want to pay tribute to EDeNn, the Equality and Diversity Early Childhood National Network, and to Start Strong for putting this conference together, for showcasing all that is good in early childhood care and education at a time when there is a tough lens on the sector, and for focusing specifically on an approach to early childhood care and education, which is very close to my own heart. That is bringing an equality perspective and a diversity perspective into your work. And really, again, putting that lens, slightly overused word by me, but putting that lens on this issue. And I think it's absolutely right to have that lens on the early years. Obviously, particularly as our society becomes more diverse, we have greater cultural variation. That becomes a more pertinent issue in many ways. But of course, the whole point of this conference, it's not just about minority groups, not just about particular issues. It is about how an equality and diversity lens or perspective is so good for all our children. And I think the points I've been making earlier about the older age groups in employment, having this lens effectively makes sure that we are preparing our children for that very tough world ahead, and making sure they'll be able to cope with the challenges of a modern world. So it's particularly relevant given the changing economic and social situation. There's a number of quotes in the book which I am going to refer to. The book I'm speaking about is the book that Colette Murray and Matthias Urban edited, Diversity and Equality in Early Childhood, an Irish Perspective. It's an extremely useful book. They do say at the beginning, you know that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. They said it took a village to write the book, and I think that's a really good sign that so many people were involved in it. I think it's a great tool for practitioners. I know many of you are trainers here today, and academics and frontline practitioners. There's great language in this, Colette and Matthias, about this issue. I particularly like the issue of proofing. I introduced the concept of equality proofing to the Commission on the Status of Women when we worked from 89 to 92, and I ensured that it became part of the first series of recommendations that came from that commission, and that it became government policy, so that various items on the government agenda had to be equality proofed. And we're very familiar now with equality proofing in relation to women particularly. But of course, equality proofing in relation to early childhood care and education settings, that's a really good concept, and I think very useful for us to think about how we do that. And from a policy point of view, I do want to invite the network to discuss with the staff in my own department how the kind of thinking that you're exploring here today can be introduced at a policy level. And Toby, of course, is on our early years strategy, and I do want to say to everyone in this group how important it is that early years strategy really is the vision for the sector for the future, to capture everything you can in that strategy, you know, to give in your submissions, to make sure your voices are heard. Because I have to convince my cabinet colleagues. I have to convince, wider society insofar as I have a role. But I think the voices of yourselves are really critical, because we do have an educational role still to play for the Irish public in relation to early years and the kind of resources that are needed if we are to do justice to the sector and to our children. And as I say, this particularly difficult challenge at this moment in time with the borrowing requirements that we have. But we really can't afford not to do it when you think of the consequences if we refuse to do it, because all of the evidence we have coming in, and this book is very strong on evidence, is telling us how important early intervention is, but particularly how important high quality intervention is. We now have the results coming in from 3 early years interventions in Dublin. The 30 million was invested, and we have really good information on what works in the early years, particularly with the more disadvantaged sections of our community and our children. We have really high quality evidence, and I believe going forward government is really only going to fund what can be proven to be effective, and we're increasingly going to be relying on high quality research, whether it's in the youth area or it's in the early childhood area. We want interventions with our children, but we want to know they're the right ones and that they work. And in that regard, it's really good to hear Colette saying that the recent evaluation that was carried out on this issue of diversity and equality, you have the research to say it improves outcomes, not just for some children, but for all children. But just to remind ourselves about the situation in Ireland, I want to quote from the book. Ireland today is diverse and unequal in many respects. Many ethnic and cultural differences are easily visible, and so are the prejudices and the discriminations that are based in them. There are, however, many other diversities we seem to fail to respect on a regular basis: gender, class, disability, religion, sexual orientation, economic status. It's a long list. Language and age. I was at a conference in Helsinki on Thursday, and I went to see some childcare facilities there. And at the conference, this woman got up to speak, and she said she was speaking on age and respect and non-discrimination. And she said, I signed up for this conference, but I experienced discrimination because the age bands that you ticked, they didn't expect that an 82-year-old would be speaking. And she gave, the WHO a lesson in discrimination. So from the early years right through, you can have discrimination. So to go back to the quote, to name some of the differences that are frequently targets of discrimination, disrespect, and bias. Discrimination and inequality, it seems, are deeply rooted in Irish society. They continually and profoundly affect the lives of children and their families. That's a quote from 2001. And then there's another quote, just to look at the more optimistic side. However, against this, the Irish have shown themselves as capable of standing up against the negative forces of prejudice and discrimination. Inequalities in Irish society have been created and perpetuated by Irish people and can only be changed by Irish people. All children are entitled to equality of access, participation, and quality outcomes, which includes the opportunity to learn in an inclusive, stimulating, culturally appropriate, and non-discriminatory environment. I think that's really well put, and it does outline the challenge that you're facing, because when you have the child in front of you in your setting, obviously the child is bringing in so much of the outside world, and you have this unique opportunity to change that child's experience in such a profound way. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you for all of the work that you do with our children, to say that these are challenging times, but there's a huge opportunity out there for us to invent the best possible future for our children in our early years settings. And I certainly would ask you for your support so that I can do my job as well as I can to ensure that early years education and early years interventions take their rightful place. I don't believe they have yet in Irish society. I think we talk about roadmaps. There's a roadmap in this book. There is a roadmap that we need to follow. We take for granted an awful lot once our children start primary school. We take for granted qualifications, training, ongoing supervision, support, and all of the other issues you're familiar with. We have to make sure that we approach the early years in this country in the same way, with the same kind of supports. And there's a big job to be done. So thank you for being here today, for giving up your time to discuss these important issues on a Saturday here in Dublin. I really look forward to hearing about the outcomes, and I do believe that your outcomes and the discussions you have need to be integrated into mainstream policy for early childhood care and education. Thank you very much indeed.